The Erdington Murders by David Eden, Chapter 1, The Weight of History. The morning mist clung to Pipe Hayes Park like a burial shroud, and Detective Inspector Sarah Millwright knew before she even saw the body that something was terribly wrong. It wasn't just the familiar copper penny taste of dread in her mouth or the way the uniformed officers stood in a loose semicircle, their faces pale as February frost. It was the date itself, May 27th, 1974. She'd grown up in Erdington, knew its streets and secrets like the lines on her palm. Knew, too, the story every local child learned to whisper in the dark, the tale of Mary Ashford, found dead in a water-filled pit on this very date 157 years ago. "Morning, Inspector." Sergeant Tom Bradshaw's voice carried that particular timbre reserved for the worst discoveries. "Young woman, early 20s, found by a dog walker at 6 this morning." Sarah ducked under the police tape, her sensible shoes squelching in the dew-soaked grass. The body lay near a drainage ditch, arms splayed at unnatural angles, dress torn and muddy. The girl's face, turned skyward, wore an expression of terminal surprise, as if death had interrupted an important thought. "Barbara Forrest," Bradshaw continued, consulting his notebook, 20 years old, works at the British Leyland factory in Longbridge, was at the Tyburn House pub last night for the Whit Monday dance. Sarah's blood turned to ice water. The Tyburn House, the very same establishment where Mary Ashford had danced on Whit Monday, 1817, mere hours before her death. She forced herself to breathe normally, to approach this like any other case, but her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Some stories don't stay buried, love. Some stories come back." Witnesses? Barmaid says she left around midnight with a bloke. Tall, dark hair, well-dressed, gave his name as Michael Thornton. The world tilted slightly. Sarah gripped her notebook tighter. Thornton? Aye. Common enough name, I suppose. But it wasn't common. Not here. Not today. Abraham Thornton had been the man tried and acquitted for Mary Ashford's murder in 1817. The coincidence was impossible, the parallels too precise to ignore. Same date, same area, same circumstances, and now, God help them, the same name. Dr. Patricia Harding, the pathologist, was already examining the body with her usual methodical precision. She looked up as Sarah approached, her expression grave behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "Preliminary assessment suggests sexual assault and strangulation," she said quietly. "Death occurred between 2 and 4 this morning. There's something else, Inspector." She gestured to the girl's hands. "Defense wounds, but also this." Sarah knelt beside her. Clutched in Barbara Forrest's right hand was a small piece of fabric, modern polyester, but cut in an old-fashioned pattern. Pinned to it was a yellowed newspaper clipping, protected by clear plastic. The headline, though faded, was still legible: "Mary Ashford Murder Trial, Thornton Acquitted." "Jesus Christ," Bradshaw breathed. Sarah stood slowly, her mind racing. This wasn't just murder, it was theater, a carefully orchestrated performance that reached across a century and a half. Someone knew the history, knew the significance of this date and place. Someone who called himself Thornton. "Seal the entire area," she ordered. "I want every blade of grass photographed, every footprint cast. And Bradshaw, pull everything we have on the Mary Ashford case. Every record, every newspaper article, every local history book that mentions it." "You think someone's copying the old murder?" Sarah looked down at Barbara Forrest's still form, at the antique newspaper clipping that shouldn't exist, at the impossible confluence of past and present. "I think," she said slowly, "we're dealing with something much stranger than that." Chapter 2. Echoes in the Archives. The Birmingham Central Library loomed like a concrete mausoleum against the gray afternoon sky. Sarah Millwright pushed through the heavy doors, leaving behind the bustle of Paradise Circus for the hushed sanctuary of accumulated knowledge. Somewhere in these stacks lay the answers she needed, or at least she prayed they did. The elderly librarian, Mrs. Enid Carver, led her through a maze of shelves to a restricted section that smelled of leather and decay. "The Ashford case," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Popular subject lately." Sarah's attention sharpened. "Someone else has been researching it? Young man, about a month ago. Very intense. Spent 3 days here, copying everything by hand." Mrs. Carver's fingers trembled slightly as she pulled out a wooden box. "Said he was writing a book. Did he leave a name?" "Thompson, I think. Or was it Thornton?" The librarian frowned. I'm sorry, dear. The memory isn't what it was. Sarah's pulse quickened. She opened the box with careful hands, revealing yellowed documents, court transcripts, and newspaper clippings from 1817. The first item was a detailed map of Erdington as it had been: Penn's Mill Lane, the fatal pit, the footpath where Mary had walked. Every location corresponded with disturbing precision to where Barbara Forrest had been found. The trial transcript made for grim reading. Mary Ashford, 20 years old, had attended a dance at the Tyburn House on Whit Monday. She'd left with Abraham Thornton, a local bricklayer. Her body was discovered the next morning in a water-filled marl pit. Despite compelling circumstantial evidence, Thornton was acquitted. He'd later invoked the archaic right of trial by combat when Mary's brother brought a private prosecution, the last time such a challenge was made in English legal history. But it was the witness statements that made Sarah's blood run cold. The descriptions of Mary matched Barbara Forrest with uncanny accuracy. Same height, same coloring, even the same style of dress. More troubling still were the testimonies about Thornton himself. Tall, dark-haired, well-spoken despite his working-class origins. Charming, persuasive, dangerous. Inspector Millwright? Sarah looked up to find Detective Constable James Chen, one of her younger officers, slightly out of breath. We've found something, ma'am. The Tyburn House, the night manager remembers this Thornton fellow, says he's been coming in every Monday for the past 2 months, always alone, always watches the dancers, never seen him before that. Description? Matches what the barmaid said, but here's the strange bit. He always pays with old money. Not old as in used, but old coins, pre-decimal. The manager thought he was an eccentric collector. Sarah felt the temperature in the library drop several degrees, or perhaps it was just her imagination, fired by too many coincidences. What about the newspaper clipping found with the body? That's just it, ma'am. Chen shifted uncomfortably. Dr. Harding's tested it. The paper, the ink, they're genuinely from 1817, not a reproduction. But that's impossible, isn't it? A newspaper clipping can't survive exposed to the elements for over a century. No, Sarah thought, it couldn't. Just as a man couldn't pay with coins that should have been out of circulation for 3 years. Just as history couldn't repeat itself with such malevolent precision. She turned back to the archives, pulling out a daguerreotype that had been tucked between pages. It showed a man in Victorian dress, standing stiffly for the camera. The image was badly damaged, the face obscured by time and chemical degradation. But something about the posture, the set of the shoulders. Mrs. Carver, Sarah called. The man who was researching here, can you remember what he looked like? The librarian approached, adjusting her spectacles. Tall, dark hair, very proper manners, old-fashioned really, wore a suit that seemed, she paused, searching for words, out of time somehow. And his hands, I remember his hands, they were stained. Stained? Like a workman's hands, brick dust perhaps, or clay. Abraham Thornton had been a bricklayer. Sarah closed the archive box, her mind reeling. Either she was dealing with the most elaborate copycat in criminal history, or... No, there was no or. There couldn't be. The dead didn't walk. The past didn't bleed into the present. But as she left the library, stepping back into the mundane bustle of 1974 Birmingham, she couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in the city, a man who shouldn't exist was already hunting for his next Mary Ashford. Chapter 3. The Dance. The Tyburn House stood at the junction of Tyburn Road and Chester Road like a Victorian ghost refusing to acknowledge the modern world. Sarah Millwright pushed through the etched glass doors just as dusk was painting Erdington in shades of purple and gray. The pub's interior hadn't changed much since the 19th century. Dark wood, brass fixtures, and an atmosphere thick with the accumulated conversations of generations. Inspector. The night manager, Robert Hartley, was a thin man who looked like he'd been dried and pressed between the pages of a ledger. I've been thinking about what you asked, about that Thornton fellow. Sarah settled onto a bar stool, accepting the cup of tea he offered. Through the archway, she could see the dance floor where both Mary Ashford and Barbara Forrest had spent their last hours. What about him? It's not just the old money. Hartley's hands worried at a bar towel. It's the way he talks, uses words nobody uses anymore. Prithee and mayhap. First time he came in, I thought he was an actor, you know? method acting for some period drama at the Rep. But actors break character. This bloke, it's like he doesn't know any other way to be. Hartley leaned closer, lowering his voice. And there's something else. He knows things about this place, things that aren't in any history book. Such as, there's a mark on the dance floor, a burn from when they had a fire here in 1823. It's been varnished over so many times you can barely see it, but he knew exactly where it was, pointed it out to me, said he remembered when it happened. Sarah's tea grew cold in her hands. He said he remembered? His exact words were, "I recall the panic that night, the screaming." Then he seemed to catch himself, laughed it off, said he meant he'd read about it. The pub was filling now with the Monday evening crowd. Workers from the British Leyland factory, secretaries from the city center, all seeking the simple comfort of a pint and conversation. Normal people living normal lives, unaware they were drinking in a place where time seemed to fold in on itself. "Is he here tonight?" Sarah asked. Hartley glanced at his watch. "If he keeps to pattern, he'll walk through that door in about 10 minutes. Always arrives at 7:30. Sarah positioned herself at a corner table with a clear view of the entrance. Chen had wanted to bring a full team, but she'd refused. Whatever, whoever they were dealing with, she sensed that overwhelming force would only drive him underground. She needed to see him first to understand what they were truly facing. At 7:30 precisely, the door opened. The man who entered was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with dark hair worn longer than current fashion dictated. His suit was impeccably tailored, but somehow wrong. The cut too formal, the fabric too heavy for the season. He moved with the careful precision of someone perpetually aware they were out of place, like an actor who'd wandered off a period film set and couldn't find his way back. But it was his eyes that made Sarah's breath catch. They swept the pub with the weight of terrible knowledge, lingering on the dance floor with something that might have been regret or hunger or both. When they found her, she felt the impact like a physical blow. He knew who she was, knew why she was there. For a moment that stretched like pulled taffy, they regarded each other across the crowded pub. Then he smiled, a gesture that belonged to another century, and approached her table. Detective Inspector Millwright. His voice carried an accent she couldn't place, neither modern Birmingham nor historical recreation, but something caught between times. I wondered when we would meet. Mr. Thornton, I presume. One of many names. He settled into the chair opposite her without invitation. Up close, she could see what Mrs. Carver had mentioned, the stains on his hands worked deep into the skin. Though it seems fitting given the circumstances. And what circumstances would those be? He studied her with those terrible, knowing eyes. You've read the records. You know what happened here, what always happens here. He gestured to the dance floor where couples were beginning to gather. Every generation, they come. Young women full of life and hope, and every generation, one of them meets me. Are you confessing to Barbara Forrest's murder? I'm confessing to nothing. His smile was sad and sharp as winter moonlight. I'm merely observing that history has patterns, rhythms, like a dance that never truly ends. Who are you? He was quiet for so long, Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. I am what remains when justice fails. What happens when the law allows a killer to walk free? I am the echo that never fades, the dance that never ends, the story that demands retelling. That's not an answer, isn't it? He stood abruptly, straightening his anachronistic suit. Tell me, Inspector, do you believe the dead can demand justice? That some crimes are so terrible they tear holes in time itself? Before she could respond, he was moving toward the dance floor. The Monday night band was starting up, playing the same kind of music that would have filled this room in 1817. And as Sarah watched, frozen in her chair, Michael Thornton began to dance. He danced alone, but his arms were positioned as if holding an invisible partner. His movements were fluid, practiced, heartbreaking in their solitary grace. The other dancers gave him a wide berth, sensing something indefinably wrong about the tall man waltzing with air. And then, between one blink and the next, Sarah saw her. A young woman in Regency dress, transparent as morning mist, matching Thornton step for step. Her face was lovely and terrible, marked with the blue-black bruises of strangulation. Mary Ashford, dancing her last dance with her murderer, trapped in an endless Whit Monday that had somehow escaped the bonds of time. Sarah blinked hard, and the vision was gone. But Thornton continued his solitary waltz, and she understood with horrible clarity what he'd meant. Some stories demanded retelling. Some dances never ended. And somewhere in Birmingham, another young woman was about to become part of a pattern that had been weaving itself for over a century and a half. Chapter 4. The Pattern Emerges. Sarah Millwright hadn't slept in 36 hours. Her office at Steelhouse Lane Police Station looked like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. Maps of Erdington from different eras overlapped on the walls, connected by red string to photographs, newspaper clippings, and hastily scrawled notes. Empty teacups formed archaeological layers on her desk. "Ma'am?" Detective Constable Chen peered around the door, concern etched on his young face. "Dr. Harding's here with the full autopsy report." Patricia Harding entered carrying a manila folder and wearing an expression that suggested she'd seen something that challenged her scientific worldview. "Sarah, we need to talk, privately." Chen took the hint and retreated. Patricia closed the door and sank into a chair. "I've been a pathologist for 15 years. I've never seen anything like this." "Tell me." "The cause of death was strangulation, as I initially reported, but the bruising pattern." Patricia opened the folder, revealing photographs that made Sarah's stomach lurch. "These marks match exactly, and I mean exactly, the documented injuries on Mary Ashford's body from 1817. You're saying he studied the historical records that carefully?" "That's just it." Patricia pulled out another set of images. "Some of these injury patterns weren't in the public record. I had to contact the Royal College of Surgeons. They have the original medical examiner's notes from 1817, never published. The bruising on Barbara Forrest's neck matches details that have been locked in their archives for over a century." Sarah felt the room tilt slightly. "That's impossible." "It gets worse." Patricia's voice dropped. "I found traces of clay under Barbara's fingernails. Not modern clay. I had it analyzed. It contains mineral compositions consistent with marl pits that were filled in during the 1850s. Clay that hasn't been exposed to air for over 100 years. The phone rang, shrill in the quiet office. Sarah grabbed it, grateful for the interruption. "Millwright." "Inspector, it's Hartley from the Tyburn house." The manager's voice was tight with panic. "You need to come quickly. There's been an incident." Sarah was already reaching for her coat. "Another body?" "No. Well, not exactly. You need to see this for yourself." 20 minutes later, Sarah stood in the pub's cellar, staring at something that shouldn't exist. The wall had partially collapsed during renovation work, revealing a hidden chamber. Inside, perfectly preserved in the cool, dry air, was a Victorian gentleman's suit, a pair of work boots caked with ancient clay, and a journal. "The builders found it an hour ago," Hartley explained. "That wall's been solid since the 1890s renovation. This room shouldn't exist on any blueprint." Sarah pulled on evidence gloves and carefully opened the journal. The first entry was dated May 28, 1817. The handwriting was cramped, agitated. "I am not mad. I write this in the hope that someone someday will understand. I am Abraham Thornton, and I am innocent of Mary Ashford's death. But innocence and justice are not the same thing. The true killer walks free, while I am forever stained by suspicion. I have been offered a bargain by something that wears my face but is not me. It promises that the truth will out, that the pattern will repeat until justice is served. I fear I am too weak to refuse." Sarah flipped through pages of increasingly frantic entries. Thornton wrote of dreams where he danced with Mary's corpse, of seeing his own face in mirrors wearing expressions he'd never made, of losing time only to find himself standing at the fatal pit. The final entry made her blood freeze. "I understand now. I am both Thornton and not Thornton. I am what guilt creates when the law fails. I will dance this dance again and again, century after century, until someone sees the truth. The next will come in 1974. Her name will be Barbara. And after her, another in 2131. The pattern cannot be broken, only fulfilled. God help them all." "Inspector?" Chen had followed her and now stood reading over her shoulder. "This is dated 1817. How could he know about Barbara Forrest?" Sarah thought of Thornton in the pub, dancing with ghosts, of clay from filled-in pits and bruises that matched across centuries, of a man who spoke of remembering things he couldn't possibly remember. Because, she said slowly, we're not dealing with a copycat. We're dealing with something that exists outside normal time, something created by a massive injustice that was never corrected. You're talking about ghosts, possession? I'm talking about a pattern that's been carved into the fabric of reality itself, a story that keeps retelling itself because it was never properly ended. She looked at Chen's skeptical face. Think about it. Abraham Thornton was acquitted despite overwhelming evidence. He invoked trial by combat to avoid retrial. The case led to massive legal reforms, but Mary Ashford never got justice. So what? The universe is trying to correct itself. Sarah thought of Thornton's words. I am what remains when justice fails. Something like that. And if this journal is right, Barbara Forrest won't be the last. The pattern will continue. She pulled out the evidence bag containing the newspaper clipping found with Barbara's body. Now she understood. It wasn't just a clue. It was a message, a desperate attempt to make someone understand the connection, to see the pattern. Chen, I need you to pull everything on unsolved murders in the Erdington area. Not just recent. Go back decades. Look for young women, similar circumstances, especially around May 27th. As Chen hurried off, Sarah remained in the hidden chamber, surrounded by the artifacts of a tragedy that refused to stay buried. Somewhere in Birmingham, Michael Thornton, or Abraham Thornton, or whatever amalgamation of guilt and injustice he'd become, was still out there. And according to the journal, the dance wasn't over yet. Patricia's words echoed in her mind. Some of these injury patterns weren't in the public record, which meant one terrifying thing. Whoever or whatever was committing these murders had access to the original crime, not through research or records, but through memory, through being there. Sarah closed the journal and sealed it in an evidence bag. She had to find Thornton again. Had to understand the rules of this macabre pattern. Because if she couldn't break the cycle, another woman would die. And another after that, stretching into a future where Mary Ashford's murder would echo through eternity, demanding a justice that could never truly come. Chapter 5. The Records of Blood. The Birmingham Records Office occupied a Victorian building on Newhall Street that seemed to exhale the musty breath of centuries. Sarah Millwright and D.C. Chen descended into the basement archives at 3 a.m, having roused the elderly keeper, Mr. Gerald Pemberton, from his bed. Unsolved murders in Erdington, you say? Pemberton shuffled ahead of them, his slippers whispering against the stone floor. Peculiar request at this ungodly hour. Sarah had already decided against explaining the full truth. It's urgent. We're looking for patterns in historical cases. What they found over the next 4 hours shattered any remaining skepticism Chen might have harbored. 1831, Catherine Hartley, aged 21, found strangled near the old Marl pits on May 27th. Last seen leaving a Whit Monday dance with a man witnesses described as resembling that Thornton fellow from the Ashford trial. 1888, Elizabeth Summers, aged 20, discovered in identical circumstances. The coroner's report noted bruising patterns remarkably similar to the infamous Ashford case. A suspect was questioned, Thomas Thornton, supposedly Abraham's grandson, though no birth records could confirm the connection. 1917, Margaret Walsh, age 22. Same date, same location, same mysterious companion. By now, local police had noticed the pattern. The case files contained a note from Inspector James Hartwell. The locals speak of a curse. They say Thornton walks again every generation seeking his Mary. Nonsense, of course, but the similarities are unsettling. Jesus, Chen whispered, photographing each document. Every generation, just like the journal said. Always young women, always May 27th. Always connected to someone named Thornton. Look at this, Sarah pointed to a report from 1945. Dorothy Mills, the investigating officer, notes that the suspect paid for drinks with Victorian coins. Sound familiar? But it was the final file that made Sarah's hands tremble. A thin folder marked 1959, restricted access. Inside was a single report from Detective Chief Inspector Ronald Ashford, Mary Ashford's great-great-grandnephew. His handwriting was shaky. I have seen him. The man who killed Susan Palmer is the same man my family has whispered about for generations. Not descended from Abraham Thornton. I.S. Abraham Thornton. I observed him for 3 hours outside the Tyburn house. He does not age. He does not change. When I confronted him, he knew my name, knew my connection to Mary. He said, "Your family's blood calls to mine across the years. One day, an Ashford will understand. I am recommending this case be sealed. Some truths are too large for the law." Ma'am. Chen's face had gone gray. If this pattern holds, there should have been a murder in 1945, 1959, but Barbara Forrest is the first since 1959. Why the break? Sarah thought she knew. The M6 motorway. They built it right through the old murder sites in the early 1960s, destroyed most of the original landscape. Maybe that disrupted things somehow. Her phone rang. Dr. Harding's voice was strained. "Sarah, I've found something else. Remember the clay under Barbara's nails? I've been analyzing it more thoroughly. It contains organic material, specifically fabric fibers and human skin cells." Modern? That's just it. Carbon dating suggests they're over 150 years old. Sarah, I think Barbara Forrest fought back against someone wearing clothes from 1817, someone whose skin cells have been dead for over a century. Sarah closed her eyes. The impossibility of it all threatened to overwhelm her. "Patricia, I need you to do something that's going to sound insane. Compare any DNA you can extract from those skin cells to the forensic evidence from the 1959 case. The samples from 1959 would be degraded beyond use. Please, just try." As Patricia hung up, Pemberton emerged from behind another shelf, carrying a leather-bound volume. "Thought you might want to see this. It's not officially part of the police records. My predecessor left it, unofficial observations about the Erdington murders." The book was filled with newspaper clippings, personal notes, and hand-drawn maps showing the locations of each murder. They formed a rough circle around the original pit where Mary Ashford died. But what caught Sarah's attention was a photograph tucked into the back cover. It showed a group of men outside the Tyburn house, dated 1952. And there, standing at the edge of the frame, was a face she recognized. Michael Thornton, looking exactly as he had 3 nights ago. Same height, same dark hair, same ill-fitting suit from another era. "Chen," she said quietly, "I want you to go back to the station. Pull together a team, our most open-minded officers. Brief them on everything." "Where are you going?" Sarah was already heading for the stairs. "To find Abraham Thornton. The journal mentioned the pattern could be fulfilled, not just broken. I think I know what that means." "Ma'am, that's dangerous. The pattern demands justice," Sarah interrupted. "Real justice, not just another death. Abraham Thornton was acquitted in 1817, but if he really is still here, still killing." She met Chen's worried gaze. "Then maybe it's time for a retrial." Outside, dawn was breaking over Birmingham, painting the sky the color of old blood. Somewhere in the city, a man who should have been dead for over a century was preparing for his next dance. But this time, Sarah intended to cut in. She thought of DCI Ronald Ashford's words, "One day an Ashford will understand." Sarah's grandmother's maiden name had been Ashford. She'd never thought it significant. Ashford was common enough in Birmingham. But now, driving through the awakening city toward a confrontation 157 years in the making, she wondered if she'd been part of this pattern all along. The dance was nearing its climax, and Sarah Millwright, née Sarah Ashford on her mother's side, was about to learn that some family legacies were written in blood. Chapter 6. The Confession. The old marl pit had been turned into a memorial garden in 1962, a small pocket of green amid the urban sprawl. Sarah Millwright stood at its edge as the morning mist rose from the carefully maintained lawn, trying to imagine it as it had been, a water-filled excavation where Mary Ashford's body had floated like a discarded doll. "You came alone." She didn't turn at the voice. She'd known he would be here. "You knew I would." Michael Thornton, Abraham Thornton, emerged from the shadows of an oak tree that had probably been a sapling when Mary died. In the growing light, she could see him more clearly than she had in the pub. His face bore the weight of impossible years, though his features remained those of a man in his 30s. "Sarah Ashford," he said, and there was something like relief in his voice. "I've been waiting for you. Your great-great-grandmother was Mary's cousin. Did you know? I worked it out." Sarah kept her voice steady, though her hand rested on her radio. The family tree was in the records. Eleanor Ashford married a Birmingham police constable named Millwright in 1852. She had Mary's eyes. Thornton moved closer, and Sarah could smell something like earth and old leather. The same green with gold flecks. You have them too. Did you kill her, Mary? For the first time in their encounters, Thornton looked genuinely surprised. Is that what you think, after all you've learned? Then tell me the truth. All of it. Thornton walked to a bench near the memorial plaque, a modern edition that read simply, "In memory of those lost to violence." He sat heavily, like a man carrying invisible chains. "I courted Mary Ashford properly," he began. Her uncle approved. "We were to be married after the harvest." "But Thomas Broadhurst wanted her too. He was gentry, wealthy. I was just a bricklayer with ambitions." Sarah remained standing, recording everything on the small device in her pocket. "What happened on May 27th, 1817? We danced. God, how we danced. Mary wore white muslin with blue ribbons. She was radiant." His voice carried the ache of fresh grief, though the events were over a century past. "Broadhurst was there, drinking heavily. When Mary and I left for a walk, he followed. The witnesses said they saw only you and Mary leave. Broadhurst knew the back ways. He intercepted us at the pit." Thornton's hands clenched. He tried to force himself on her. "I fought him, but he had a pistol. He made me watch while he—" The words choked off. "When she fought back, he strangled her. Then he hit me with the pistol butt. When I woke, Mary was in the water, and Broadhurst was gone." "Why didn't you tell the court?" "I tried." The anguish in his voice made birds flee from nearby trees. "But Broadhurst's father was a magistrate. They'd already paid witnesses to say they'd seen him at home. Who would believe a working man over gentry? So I was tried, acquitted on technicality, but forever branded a killer. And then I met something. In my despair, in my rage at the injustice, something answered. It looked like me, but wasn't. It offered me a bargain. I would live to see justice done, but I would also bear the guilt of every death until then. I would become both victim and killer, trapped in an endless cycle until the truth was acknowledged." Sarah felt the pieces clicking into place. You don't just kill them, you relive it. You become both yourself and Broadhurst. Every generation, the compulsion comes. I find a girl who looks like Mary and I dance with her, and then— He shuddered. "I watch myself do what Broadhurst did, helpless to stop it. Then I wake, covered in blood and guilt, to wait another generation." The journal said the pattern could be fulfilled only when an Ashford acknowledges the truth, when the real killer is named and justice finally spoken. He looked at her with eyes that had seen too much. "I've waited 157 years for you, Sarah Ashford Millwright." Sarah's radio crackled. Chen's voice. "Ma'am, Dr. Harding's confirmed the DNA match, but there's something else. She found a second genetic profile in the samples. Male, showing markers consistent with the Broadhurst family line. Of course, it's not just your DNA under their nails. It's his too, Broadhurst's." Thornton nodded slowly. "We are bound together, he and I. His crime, my punishment. Every murder carries both our marks." "Thomas Broadhurst's family still lives in Birmingham," Sarah said. "They own Broadhurst Industries, pillars of the community. Built on blood." Thornton stood. "But naming him isn't enough. The pattern demands more." "What do you mean?" "I mean," Thornton said, his form beginning to waver in the morning light, "that tonight is Monday, and somewhere in Birmingham, a young woman is preparing to go dancing. The compulsion is already building. I can feel her out there, another Mary, waiting to meet her Thornton." "No," Sarah stepped forward. "We end this now. Come with me. Make a formal statement. We'll release it to the press, name Broadhurst as the killer. The truth will finally be told." "And you think that will be enough, after all these years, all these deaths?" Thornton laughed bitterly. "The entity I bargained with demands blood justice. Either the guilty family acknowledges their ancestors' crime and makes amends, or the pattern continues." Sarah thought quickly. "Then we make them acknowledge it. The current Lord Broadhurst, I can bring him here, make him face what his family did. Before midnight? Before the dance begins again?" She checked her watch. It was only 8 in the morning. "I'll make it happen." For the first time in their encounters, Thornton looked hopeful. "If you fail, I won't be able to stop myself. The compulsion is too strong now. I'll find her, whoever this generation's Mary is, and history will repeat." I won't fail. Sarah was already moving toward her car. Stay here. Fight the compulsion as long as you can. Sarah, his voice stopped her. When this is over, whether we succeed or fail, thank you for believing, for seeing me as more than a monster. She looked back at the man trapped between life and death, between guilt and innocence. Hold on, Abraham. After 157 years, you're finally going to get justice. As she drove away, Sarah caught a glimpse in her mirror of Thornton standing by the memorial, his form translucent in the morning sun. Time was running out. Somewhere in Birmingham, a young woman was going about her Monday, unaware that she'd been marked by fate to dance with death, unless Sarah could rewrite a story that had been telling itself for over a century. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. Lord Simon Broadhurst's office occupied the top floor of Broadhurst Industries' Birmingham headquarters, a glass and steel monument to new money built on old foundations. Sarah Millwright had bullied her way past 3 layers of security, armed with a warrant and the kind of righteous fury that made personal assistants scatter like frightened birds. Detective Inspector. Broadhurst didn't rise from behind his mahogany desk. He was 63, with the kind of carefully maintained appearance that spoke of private physicians and Swiss clinics. My solicitor tells me you're making rather wild accusations about my family. Sarah placed the evidence on his desk. Copies of the historical records, the DNA analysis, photographs spanning over a century. Your ancestor, Thomas Broadhurst, murdered Mary Ashford in 1817 and let another man take the blame. That man has been affected by the injustice. There have been copycat murders every generation since, and another woman will die tonight unless you act. Broadhurst's laugh was cultured and dismissive. You're talking about ghost stories, Inspector, urban legends. Surely the police have better things to do than chase fairy tales. Look at the evidence. I see speculation and coincidence. He pushed the papers back toward her. My family built this city, Inspector. We've contributed more to Birmingham than you could possibly imagine. I won't have our name dragged through the mud based on folklore. Sarah felt time slipping away. It was already past noon. A woman will die tonight. Barbara Forrest is already dead. How many more before you? That's enough. Broadhurst stood. My family has no connection to these tragic events. Now, unless you have evidence that would stand up in court, real court, not the court of public opinion, I'll ask you to leave. Outside, Sarah's hands shook as she called Chen. He won't budge, threatened to sue for harassment if I persist. Ma'am, we've got another problem. We've identified potential victims, 12 women in the Birmingham area who match the profile, all planning to attend various Monday night events. We don't have the manpower to protect them all. Sarah checked her watch, 2:47 p.m. The dance would begin at sunset. She drove back to the memorial garden, but Thornton was gone. In his place was a note, written in handwriting she recognized from the journal. The compulsion grows. I can feel her, Emma. Emma Richards. She'll be at the Tyburn House tonight. I'm trying to stay away, but the pull is too strong. Stop me, Sarah. Please. Emma Richards. Sarah ran the name through her phone. 22 years old, a nurse at City Hospital. The photo showed a pretty brunette with green eyes that could have been Mary Ashford's. By the time Sarah reached Emma's flat in Aston, it was nearly 5 o'clock. The young woman answered the door in a towel, clearly preparing for her night out. Emma Richards? I'm Detective Inspector Millwright. You're in danger. You can't go out tonight. Emma's face went from confusion to fear. Is this about my ex? Has Craig done something? No, it's complicated. There's been a series of murders targeting women like you. Please, just stay home tonight. But even as she spoke, Sarah could see the skepticism creeping in. A vague warning from a frantic-looking police officer wasn't enough. Emma would nod, agree, then go out anyway. Young people always did. Sarah made a decision that would likely end her career. Come with me. There's something you need to see. She drove Emma to the memorial garden as the sun began its descent. Thornton was there, pacing like a caged animal. When he saw Emma, his whole body went rigid. Mary, he whispered. Then, shaking his head violently, No, Emma. Your name is Emma. Emma grabbed Sarah's arm. Who is this man? Why does he know my name? Because he's going to kill you tonight, Sarah said bluntly. Not because he wants to, but because he's trapped in a pattern, unless we can break it. What followed was the most surreal hour of Sarah's career. She explained everything: the murders, the curse, the truth about 1817. Emma, to her credit, didn't run. Perhaps it was Thornton's obvious anguish, the way he fought against invisible chains every time he looked at her. "This is insane," Emma said finally. "But my gran used to tell stories about the Erdington murders, said our family never went out on May 27th. She studied Thornton with a nurse's assessment. You're in pain. 157 years of pain," Thornton agreed. He checked an antique pocket watch. 2 hours, I'll add your death to my collection. Sarah's phone rang. Chen's voice was urgent. "Ma'am, we've got movement at Broadhurst Industries. Lord Broadhurst is leaving with a full security detail. And get this, he's heading toward Erdington." Sarah felt a spark of hope. "He's coming. Emma, I need you to be brave a little longer. We're going to end this, but it's going to take all of us." She turned to Thornton. "The Tyburn house, that's where it always begins. We make our stand there." Thornton's laugh was bitter. "You think you can change the ending? The story has been written. It always ends the same way." "No," Sarah said firmly. "Stories can be rewritten, patterns can be broken, but only if we face the truth together." As they drove toward the Tyburn house, the sun bleeding red across the Birmingham skyline, Sarah prayed she was right. Because if she was wrong, by midnight, Emma Richards would be just another verse in a ballad of death that had been playing for over a century. The final dance was about to begin. Chapter 8. The Last Dance. The Tyburn house thrummed with Monday night energy, oblivious to the supernatural drama about to unfold within its walls. Sarah Millwright had cleared the dance floor, citing a police investigation, much to the outrage of the regulars. Now, as the clock approached 9, the pub stood empty, save for the players in this centuries-old tragedy. Emma Richards sat at the bar, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. Abraham Thornton stood as far from her as the room allowed, his body trembling with the effort of resistance. Every few minutes, he would take an involuntary step toward her before forcing himself back. "He's fighting so hard," Emma said quietly. "I can see it killing him." Sarah checked her watch. "Broadhurst will be here. He has to be." The door burst open. Lord Simon Broadhurst entered, but not with the security detail Chen had reported. He came alone, and Sarah saw immediately that something had changed. His carefully maintained composure was gone, replaced by a haunted expression. "My daughter," he said without preamble. "Rebecca, she's 23, looks just like her mother did at that age." He pulled out a photograph with shaking hands. "She was going to a dance tonight in London. I told her to stay home, couldn't explain why, but I knew. God help me, I've always known." "You knew about the murders?" "Family secret," Broadhurst said bitterly. "Passed down from father to son. We were told it was superstition, coincidence. But we also kept records. Every generation we'd check the papers on May 28th, hoping." He looked at Thornton, hoping it had finally ended. Thornton's voice was strained. "Then you know what your ancestor did." Thomas Broadhurst was a monster. The admission seemed to physically pain him. "We've spent 157 years building an empire to bury his shame, but you can't build high enough to escape the truth." "Then acknowledge it," Sarah urged. "Here, now. Say what really happened." Broadhurst moved to the center of the dance floor. "I, Simon James Broadhurst, acknowledge that my ancestor, Thomas Broadhurst, murdered Mary Ashford on May 27, 1817. He allowed an innocent man to suffer for his crime. My family has known this truth and hidden it for over a century and a half." The air in the pub changed, became charged with possibility. Thornton gasped, his form flickering between solid and translucent. "Is that enough?" Emma asked. "No." Thornton's voice was becoming distant. "Justice requires more than words." Sarah understood. Restitution. The Broadhurst fortune was built on a foundation of injustice. It needs to be. "I'll do it," Broadhurst interrupted. "I'll establish a trust for the victims' families, for justice reform. I'll tell the truth publicly, whatever the cost to our reputation." He looked at Thornton. "What else? What else do you need?" Thornton was fading now, becoming more ghost than man. "Dance with her." "What? You carry Thomas's blood. I carry Abraham's curse. She carries Mary's spirit. I can see it in her. They all carry a piece of Mary." His voice was almost inaudible. "Dance with her. Show that it could have ended differently, that a Broadhurst and an Ashford could have met in peace, not violence." The old music system crackled to life, though no one had touched it. A waltz began to play, not modern music, but something older, stranger. Broadhurst looked at Emma, who nodded and stood. "I don't really know how to waltz," Emma admitted. "Nor do I," Broadhurst said. "Perhaps that's fitting, a new dance for a new ending." They moved awkwardly at first, a young nurse and an aging businessman trying to rewrite history with clumsy steps. But as they danced, the air shimmered. Sarah saw them, all of them. Mary Ashford in white muslin, Catherine Hartley, Elizabeth Summers, Margaret Walsh, Dorothy Mills, Susan Palmer, Barbara Forrest. All the women who had died, dancing in a circle around Emma and Broadhurst. And at the edge of the floor, two men, Abraham Thornton, young and whole as he'd been in 1817, watching with tears streaming down his face. And beside him, a shadow in the shape of Thomas Broadhurst, growing dimmer with each turn of the dance. "I'm sorry," the shadow whispered, though whether it was Simon speaking or his ancestor, Sarah couldn't tell. "I'm so very sorry." The music reached a crescendo. Emma and Simon stopped dancing. And in that moment of stillness, Abraham Thornton smiled, the first genuine smile Sarah had seen from him. "It's finished," he said. "The pattern is broken. The story has a new ending." The ghostly dancers faded one by one, each offering what might have been forgiveness or farewell. Mary Ashford was the last to go. She looked at Abraham with such tenderness that Sarah had to turn away from the intimacy of it. "Will you rest now?" Mary asked him. "I've been resting for 157 years," Abraham replied. "Now, finally, I can move on." They faded together, dancing to music only they could hear, until the Tyburn house was just a pub again, empty of ghosts and full of ordinary shadows. Emma sank into a chair. "Did that really happen?" Lord Broadhurst, Simon now, Sarah thought, seeing how the confession had humanized him, nodded slowly. "It happened, and tomorrow I'll make sure everyone knows it happened. The truth after all these years." Sarah looked around the empty pub, then at her watch. 11:47 p.m. May 27th was almost over, and Emma Richards was still alive. The pattern was broken. "What happens now?" Emma asked. "Now," Sarah said, "we live with the truth, all of us, and we make sure this never happens again." Outside, church bells began to toll midnight. May 28th began like any other day, but for the first time in 157 years, it began without the weight of an uncorrected injustice. In the memorial garden where it all began, a new plaque would soon stand beside the old one. It would tell the true story of Mary Ashford's death and Abraham Thornton's innocence. It would list the names of all the women who died because the truth was buried. And at the bottom, in small letters, it would read, "The truth, though it comes late, comes at last." Sarah Millwright closed the case file on the Erdington murders. Some stories, she'd learned, demanded to be told correctly, even if it took centuries to find the right ending. In the silence of the Tyburn house, just for a moment, she could swear she heard the echo of a waltz and two voices laughing as they danced into whatever comes after the final page.